Welcome to another special garden edition of Drinks Coach. Can't remember what number we're on now. 124, is it? So, thank you very much to Julian and Sandra, who have decided to spend another week in Toulouse. And in homage to them in so many ways, I've chosen a wine which is the closest red fine wine region to Toulouse, in fact. It's about an hour north, near the beautiful Dordogne. And it's a beautiful, incredible medieval city with a very famous, unbelievable, intact medieval bridge called Cahors. C-A-H-O-R-S. Yeah, it's the bottom. It says Malbec Cahors there. Malbec? Malbec, I hear you say. Yes. So this is where Malbec's from. Malbec is one of the more complex of the Carmenet grape varieties. Now, the Carmenet grape variety started off with Cabernet Franc. Watch next episode. There's going to be a special Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc started off being planted around Bordeaux in sort of like over 1,200 years ago, and then at some moment, not that long after, a few hundred years later, it started to metamorphosize and started to mutate. And because it's a hermaphroditic plant, it has to have sex with itself, and it self-pollinates. So you end up with all sorts of mutations occurring, just like in the Habsburg Empire, so you've got big chins and wonky eyes and stuff. But it's these mutations that have given us the new grape varieties that we know and love. So we started off with Cab Franc, we ended up with Sauvignon Blanc, then we had Carmenet, then we had Cabernet Sauvignon, then from there we got Merlot, then from Merlot we got Malbec, we got Petit Verdot, and it went on and on like this. Malbec very much seemed to be the slightly rustic, highly tannic cousin of the varieties which were much more refined, so-called refined, in Bordeaux. It became the purvey of Cahors. And during the 40s, 50s and 60s, Cahors had this strapline, the black country wines of France. And I'm not sure if that was them just desperately trying to turn a frown upside down. But it doesn't sing to me, does it? If somebody said the black country wines of the south of France, you think, well, they sound pretty hard work. They're sort of like tannic, are they over-extracted? I don't know. Well, they were for a long time. And people didn't know how to use Malbec properly. Malbec, with the greenhouse effect, Malbec is becoming much easier to grow in places like Cahors, and is now being replanted in Bordeaux because the climate's so much warmer. But of course, if you're planting it in high altitude vineyards in Argentina, one of the largest wine growing countries in the world, certainly fourth or fifth in the list of biggest producers of wine, they produce almost nothing but Malbec, and it's an incredible wine if you have enough sunshine and the tannins are managed well. If not, then the famous reputation that Cahors had in the 60s and 70s would have been justified, which is the wine would rip your face off, basically. It would just tear the enamel off your teeth. You'd be walking home with half a tooth, or you had to keep it for about 25 years, or eat it with lots of protein and fat. What we've got here are some fantastic sausages bought from the farm shop in Gomshall down the Surrey Hills, one of my favourite places to go and shop at the weekend. Amazing sausages from the local butcher. But more importantly, Cahors and Malbec go beautifully with these things. Lamb cutlets, lamb chops. So we're going to have a lamb chop in a minute with some Cahors. So thank you very much, Julian and Sandra, giving me the idea to do Cahors in the first place. But there's so much to tell you, so much to say in one show. What I did want to say primarily is that I back Team Cahors. Cahors is going to have a massive, massive resurgence. And it's partly because some people in Cahors are doing a very, very good job of remarketing and getting Cahors back in front of the people that count. But also, quality just sings. Truth will out. And the quality of the wines in Cahors are absurdly high for the price if compared to its slightly more noble cousins in Bordeaux. In fact, if you go to the end of the last century, around the 1900s, Cahors was on the table of every fine dining meal, every royal occasion. There would be Cahors and there would be Bordeaux. There would be wines from Saint-Emilion, there would be wines possibly from the Medoc. Pomerol wasn't even discovered until the 60s. I thought that was fairly, just country wines. But those wines can cost thousands of pounds a bottle now. Just shows you how wrong they were. But then what happened? Well, in 1855 there was a classification of the wines in Bordeaux, which was for the Great Exhibition, the World Exhibition. And what actually then happened was that because there was Grand Cru written on the bottles of all the Bordeaux wines, and it didn't say Grand Cru on the bottles of Cahors, because Cahors was a different region, they kind of fell out of favour. They weren't the trendy wines anymore. And everyone was trying to fight to buy the best wines in Bordeaux from the 61 wines mentioned on the 1855 classification, and the Bordeaux wines kind of slipped into the dark, which is a shame, because I'm standing here right now. I'm sitting here right now, telling you that these wines are as good as any wines in Bordeaux. Okay, this bottle, put Chateau Mouton next to it, put Chateau Lafite next to it, put any number of the fine wines from Pomerol and Saint-Emilion next to it. This wine would not be found out in a lineup. In fact, I would say there are a lot of people in the world that would prefer it. So, why these four? Well, actually, I have to come clean. 3 of these wines are from the same producer. Bertrand and Christine Vigouroux, very, very generous hosts. I've been invited twice to their home and to their wineries. And tasted, in fact, almost every vintage made of this wine. I drank Chateau Haute-Serre back to 1988, and virtually none of the wines had fallen over at this point. So it just shows these wines are perfectly capable of aging effortlessly for 30 years. I mean, 30 years. That says something. There are very, very famous producers, I think possibly slightly more famous than the wines that the Vigouroux family are producing, but I think it's only a matter of time before Bertrand's wines, Haute-Serre and Mercuès and a few others, are put in their rightful place amongst the firmament of the best Cahors. Lagrange, du Cèdre, Clos de Coutale, got one from there. Where are we? Clos Triguedina, Clos de Gamo. These wines are real prestigious wines, which you only really see on restaurant lists in London, in France, and they're wines that sit next to Bordeaux at £80-90 a bottle. So not just me that thinks that. It's just that we've got to convince you lot to drink this stuff. Because if you're going to buy a really, really expensive bottle of Bordeaux, these days a Cru Classé Bordeaux wine, not even wine particularly from a particularly good vintage, made by a particularly top estate, will fetch £50 or £60 a bottle minimum. This wine is £27 and kicks the crap out almost all of the wines in the Medoc, in my opinion. Okay, I'm just making sure we don't burn sausages. I did a show on Shirazes, and of course Australians will be upset if I burn sausages, but the French would be even more upsetter, I think. La cuisine française. Okay. I did go and try and find some wines. Everyone claims to sell at Cahors. I'm sure Lidl has got one. I didn't look. Pretty sure that Sainsbury's has a taste difference Cahors. There is a Tesco's Finest Cahors, which I went out to try and find, and it says it's in stock online, but I went to 3 large supermarkets, and it wasn't in any of them, unfortunately. But if you get a chance to find Tesco Finest Cahors, or if you're ordering your shopping online, you want to order it in, do buy it, because although it's a co-op Cahors, it's £7.50, and I would really struggle to find a bottle of French red wine as good as that anywhere else in this country at £7.50. I mean, £7.50, it is giving it away. Okay, it's not the finest wine on earth at £7.50, but you try and find a better food wine. It's elegant, it's smoky, it has an earthy, tarry chocolatiness, it's got a smell of dried black currants and blueberries. It does the trick. It's probably not oaked, but it doesn't need oak because Malbec's got enough tannin as it is. So, £7.50. So then I went to Waitrose. I went to 3 Waitroses. I'm in Nappy Valley here. This is where all the rich people go to spawn. In this area, rich people, lawyers and stuff, just come here and then have children. So there's Waitroses everywhere. I went into 3 local Waitroses, Balham, Wandsworth, and one further up the road. And I asked them, can I have a bottle of their Cahors? And they said they didn't list it. So I don't know where Waitrose is listing its £9.99 family ready, delicious, goes with dinner, kind of just mutes out the sound of screaming children wines. But it seems to me they're missing a trick. Stock Cahors in Balham and stock Cahors in Wandsworth, please, because otherwise I'd buy it. I would buy it. And the producer they have is a guy, Jean-Luc Baldès, who owns Clos Triguedina, which is a wonderfully perfumed, incredibly smooth Cahors, and if anything shows how far Cahors come from the really tight, dry, rip your face off tannins that Cahors had in the 60s to where they are now, it's those wines. And the Malbec de Cahors from Jean-Luc Baldès, Clos Triguedina, I don't know what exactly it's called. It's in Waitrose. I'll put the details in the bio. It's £9.99. It's delicious. So sorry, no evidence that Tesco's or Waitrose sell them, but I know they do. So then I was left with my local wine merchant, Philglas and Swiggot. Shout out to Justin Knock. Incredible, incredible shop. I have to go in like this. I have to walk in and go, can I have your Cahors, please? Because if I just drop one hand, I'll see something I want to buy. It is one of those shops where I honestly would say that if you went in there and there was a power cut and you closed and the lights went out, you could grab anything off the shelf in the dark, pull the cork, and you'd enjoy it. He doesn't do bad wine. He charges for it, to be fair. This wine is £13.50. Absolutely brilliant example of classic Cahors from one of the great estates, Clos Coutale. That doesn't sound like much money. But then, if you're a member of the Wine Society, you remember I'm talking about the Wine Society from time to time? Yeah. If you're not a member yet, well, more for you, because the Wine Society is selling this stuff for just under £9. And that's an amazing wine for £9. And frankly, a perfectly decent one at £13.50. So let's start there. Right, this is the first wine we're going to try today. 2019, Clos Coutale, Malbec Cahors. 13.5% alcohol, so it's kind of the same weight as Bordeaux. They're not always giant, big Australian-style wines, although that is coming. So, this is made by Philippe Bernard at Clos Coutale. Right, first of all, Malbec, deep colour. You know that. People have drunk Malbec. Almost anyone who's interested in watching this show will have some experience. Will have some experience of Argentinian Malbec, and of course, Malbec isn't from Argentina. As I said, it's from the southwest of France, the Black Country wines of France, and there are other red wine regions around there which also similarly produce wines which were considered to be very tough and tannic, but go so well with rich food, because the food is pretty rich around there. And that would be something like Madiran, is where the great variety Tannat comes from. And this cheeky little beggar has a cheeky bit of Tannat in it, in fact. By law, Malbec has to be 70% Malbec. By law, Cahors has to be 70% Malbec. This wine is 70%, with 15% Merlot, I believe, and 15% Tannat. And I don't know, what does Tannat add to it? Well, Tannat has a sinewyiness, a dry sinewyiness that, I mean, Tannat wines, Madiran wines, like Cahors wines, if you leave them for 30 years, they go on and on and on. And as long as they've got enough structure, enough fruit, and Tannat isn't famous for its fruit, but if it does have enough fruit, then when they're old, they taste magnificent. Whenever I go to a Michelin-starred restaurant, either in England or France, I look for wines. There's a producer called Chateau, which is a Madiran, which is always, when you look at it, a very reasonably priced wine. Even now, you're paying £35–40 for it on the list. And the wines you're drinking are 20 years old, and they're fantastic. Made by the great producer at Chateau Montus, Alain Brumont, one of the great supermen of the region. Brumont kind of put Madiran back on the map, and Madiran has a wine called Le Tir, the tire, as in the aircraft, car tire. Le Tir, €70, 100% Tannat. It's a dead ringer for a Pauillac, a first growth Pauillac, not first, second, third growth anyway, but very good. Anyway, so this one has a lovely bright cherry nose. It's 2019. It probably needs another year to really assimilate, because I can smell some vanilla from the wood there. I know the 2018 was absolutely delicious, and there's a lot of harmony. It's just a matter of time. It doesn't take long to come around. I'll just stick it in a jug. It'll happen in a few minutes. You just need food with it. Oh. Emma will be lucky if there's any lamb chops left at the end of the store. Okay, so, moving on. We're now moving from classic producers, famous people like the guy at Haute-Serre, or Jean-Luc Baldès, Monsieur Bernard. We're now going to who is probably the largest producer of premium wines in Cahors, which is the Vigouroux family. Établissement Vin de Georges Vigouroux. Georges' son Bernard is now in charge, has been for some time. He and his fabulously elegant, beautiful, stylish wife Christine, hi to both of you, are both generous with their time and with their knowledge, and have totally transmogrified a business which was doing very well already, sold a lot of negociant wines. They were making contract Cahors for other people from fruit in the region, buying fruit, making the wine, selling it on. But they also had two family estates, one called Chateau Mercuès, which is also a 5-star Grand Luxe Relais à Chateau castle hotel, which is the finest hotel I've ever stayed in my life. something to look at. It's amazing. It's a 14th century castle with crenellations. It's still got turrets. It's an amazing swimming pool, and it is amazing. And I believe it used to be the local bishop's summer palace back in the day, and it must have been built in the 13th, I imagine, or possibly 14th centuries. Now, he's also got another estate, which is the family home, which is further up into the valleys of Cahors, further up, I think going northwest, and it's one of the highest altitude vineyards in Cahors, and there's a place called Chateau de Haute-Serre. There's the Grand Vin right here, which we're going to taste in a minute. I'm not going to lie, I'm drooling. This is one of my favourite wines in France. And then we'll go on to try a wine from this aforementioned castle where you can go and stay with your secretary or your loved one, whatever. But it has the most amazing food as well. It has a Michelin star, and it's just the most... It's the last word in glamorous hotels. Anyway, there's a wine here from Chateau Mercuès. There's a wine here from the home estate, Haute-Serre, where, by the way, they've planted lots of oak trees and inoculated the ground with truffles. So in the future, you can go on truffle forays, which is really, really cool. And they're really trying to ramp up the gastronomy in the region. So Haute-Serre has a wonderfully rustic, fantastic bistro-style restaurant, which is very, very popular, where they cook all sorts of wonderful local produce from the region. Mercuès is next level. Mercuès is up there with the finest tables in France. So, what's this fella here? Well, this is also Georges Vigouroux, as it says around the top. You can see that? Georges Vigouroux. It's called Le Grand Retour. Le Grand Retour. The Grand Return of Malbec. The comeback of Malbec is what we're talking about, which is quite cool, because that's what I've been mentioning. Bernard and his wife are doing enormous amounts to try and reinvigorate people's love for Cahors and try and put it back in the place it was at the turn of the last century, amongst the greatest wines in Bordeaux, or the greatest red wines in the world for that matter. And this wine costs a pittance. I think it's... What's that, pittance? It's not a pittance, but for what you get it is. It's $11.99 in Majestic, I think. If you buy a box of 6, it's a tenner. Maybe it's a bit more than that. Let's call it 12 quid and be safe, but it'll be in the bio below. We're going for a wine which is very, very traditional in my opinion. Similar level of alcohol. They're both 13.5% alcohol. We're going from a wine that has lovely, fresh, lifted, sinewy, tarry flavours, to a wine that's a lot glossier, a lot more modern in its face, a lot more, I suppose, in some ways, a lot more New World, a lot more sort of Argentinian in spirit, I suppose. And he spent an awful lot of time, this is Bernard Vigouroux, in research with universities and the top estates in Mendoza, in Argentina, finding ways to soften the tannins of his wine and to see how they can make wines with such great extraction of fruit, but also make wines that don't rip your face off like they used to. So he's not averse to his New World cousins. He knows that they're the solution rather than the cause. And anyway, let's have a look at this wine. Much darker in colour. Well, I say it's not actually much darker. It's denser, but it's got a lovely red colour to it. Smells of like dried thyme, fresh plums and blueberries, much riper smelling. Oh, I also want to thank Claire Laveau White, who's watching this probably, hopefully, from Les Products Vignerons de France. I've known her for many years. Her and her father have been selling fantastic sparkling wine from Carcassonne to Tesco's and Waitrose and many other people for many, many years, from Cave Sur Dark, and I didn't realise that she was behind the fantastic wines here. She brings these wines in too. And thank you very much for sending me samples, which I got at a virtual London wine fair. The London wine fair didn't happen this year, so you investigate wines that are being offered, and I said, any chance I can have a look at these. And that's the reason why I'm showing you these gorgeous wines now, and that's why I'm going to have such a nice dinner tonight. We're looking at, it's going to run out. It looks like it's not exactly flaming. I can finish off in the oven. Okay, right, so Le Grand Retour Malbec, £12. Gee, that's a proper mouthful of French wine. If I didn't know better, it does taste like a Saint-Emilion or Montagne Saint-Emilion well made from a ripe year. It's plummy, it's got a lovely, sort of sucky, toothsome tannin to it. Be absolutely magic with duck, with anything, but lamb is the thing that I always go for with these sort of wines. Okay, going from there, we've got Mercuès on this side, and we've got Haute-Serre on this side. Now, given a choice, because what I could have done was opened a bottle of Chateau Mercuès Grand Vin and a bottle of Chateau Haute-Serre Grand Vin, and then we could discuss the relative merits, because they're two very different styles. Mercuès is made in soils which are further down towards the river. They're more what we would call alluvial or sablé. They have very, very good drainage, quite a lot of regular clay. But if you go right up to the top, onto the ridge, where they have the real kind of like super soils of Cahors. You have gravels, which are very, very good for draining, but you also have loam, which is like a red clay, very good at water retention, capillarity, giving the vines just enough water, not too much. Wonderful soil, and absolutely perfect for the production, not just of Malbec, but of red wines in general. So generally speaking, I tend to go for the Haute-Serre of the Mercuès, when they're side by side from the same vintage. The Haute-Serre tends to be a bit more refreshing, higher altitude, more acidity, a tautness and elegance, I think, that the Mercuès doesn't have. But the Mercuès, in return, gives you a boulder of unbelievable fruit, of blueberries and blackberries and brambles. It's just incredible amounts of fruit. And actually, the higher up the pay scale you go in Mercuès, and the more serious the wines get, the more mind-blowingly bombastic they become, and they become real kind of show ponies, but in a really good way. I mean, enormous richness and power, which hopefully we'll be able to show you in a few seconds. So, first of all, this is Haute-Serre. This is a wine that will cost you £25 to £28. I believe they're being shipped, if you're in restaurant business, by a Notria. In fact, I did go to a Notria dinner or lunch with them. Chateau Haute-Serre, 2018, current release, incredible vintage. The wines are dark, wonderful, deep colours. Oh, man. Okay, so this is 90% Malbec and 10% Merlot, but the Merlot matters. You can smell it. It's got this dried herb fragrance to it. There's kind of like, you can hear two voices. It's not just propping up or adding softness to the richness of the Malbec. There are two voices. It adds complexity as well. So, that nose is amazing. That nose just reminds me of, actually, this is the funny thing. I know that Bertrand studied winemaking in Toulouse, but then went on to work in Bordeaux. And I studied winemaking at the l'Institut in Bordeaux. And when I sit here and smell wines like this at this age, it reminds me of sitting in a quite a nice little bistro somewhere and just offering up a few extra shekels to buy the expensive glass of wine to go with lunch, and sitting there watching all tourists going by, pretending to be French. So you don't have to talk to anyone. And then going, this is why I'm here. I'm here because I want to learn how to make this. I want to know how this is possible. That's such a stunning wine. Absolutely stunning. Knowing that it's effortlessly capable of aging for minimum of 25 years, possibly 40 in a vintage this good. I think £25 is worth it, don't you? It's not an everyday wine. Definitely Dad's birthday wine, or even your birthday wine, or New Year's Eve lamb. Stunning. Also online, if you're in France, they actually sell older vintages of this. I think currently they're selling the 2000. 20 years old. And the wine's got so much freshness and vigour. It's incredible. And I think if I was to pick one previous vintage of this wine that really blew my mind in the full lineup, it was very memorably the 2008. So Bertrand, Christine, it was my 50th birthday last year. If you fancy sending me a bottle of 2008 Haute-Serre, I wouldn't say no. But thank you very much for your hospitality this far. Okay, so, lovely. We've got Tesco, £7.50. We've got Waitrose, £9.99. Both in absentia, because they just don't sell them in my local shops. We're up to about £13, or around the same sort of money, really. Depends if you had to buy it from independent, but very well chosen by my locals, Philglas and Swiggot. Great name, isn't it? Then we've got Majestic, which is a shade over, a couple of pounds more. Then we're double money. Now we're in the hardcore, serious stuff. So, Georges Vigouroux, Haute-Serre, 28 quid, let's call it. Fantastic. Probably just as well the sausages, actually. Very spicy. Now, we're on to kind of the next project for Bertrand. So they have kind of like a second wine, an unoaked wine. I think it's called Retour, and I can't remember what the other one's called. Seigneur de Mercuès. But they have a wine which is below the estate wine, everyday bistro wine. Don't have to wait too long for it to come round, all ready to drink. Then you have the Grand Vin, which is the wine by which it's judged, the estate classic wine. Then there's 2 levels above that. Cléon Dadine for Haute-Serre and Cuvée 6666 for Mercuès. It does sound like the number of the beast, but obviously it's not. That's 666. Or I believe it was a mistake. It's actually supposed to be 600. But this is Cuvée 6666. Why is it called Cuvée 6666? Well, it's because Bertrand Gabriel Vigouroux has gone about replanting a lot of his vineyards, some of his better vineyards, by planting more vines per acre or hectare. Normally, 4,000 to 5,000 vines per hectare is usual in Bordeaux and in Cahors, unless you go to the really fancy estates, where they do plant with much higher intensity, much higher density. And here what they've done is they've increased the number of vines from 5,000 by 50%, well, up significantly to 6,666 vines per hectare. So by doing that, each vine is competing for the same amount of water, but there's more vines. So the vines have to struggle a little bit harder. We call this vine competition. It also means that each vine produces fewer bunches of grapes, but the bunches of grapes it produces, because it feels like there's a rarity of resource, ends up more concentrated, more intense. It just extends the harvest period as well, so that they get more complexity because there's more time on the plant in the sunshine. So this wine is basically the same sort of wine as this, but they've just got more factories of Malbec making you, or Cahors for you, per hectare of vines. Also, this wine is picked a little later. I remember tasting this in tank at Chateau Mercuès with Bertrand and his winemaker, and I remember thinking, oh my God, what is this? What is this crazy wine? I'll show you. Look at the colour. I mean, that colour, oh my God. Compared to this, colour's 3 times darker. It's blue-black. Look at that. It's the colour of a good bruise. Okay, so... Wow, wow. Well, there is a wine above this, which is called Cuvée Icône Wow. And I said, well, it's a silly name. And he made me taste it, and I went, oh, wow. And he said, see? He has a wine above this, which is 125 euros. £100 a bottle. It's a bold statement to say that you can make a wine that's worth £100, but you put that wine up against the finest wines in Bordeaux, which are 600 to 1,000 euros a bottle now, and it happily stands alongside them. So I think it's very brave, but also he's raising the bar and creating headroom for other people in Cahors to go, no, you know what, we're not going to be the second cousin to Bordeaux anymore, we're going to do something a bit more special. So here we are. The rebirth. Le Grand Retour of Cahors. See you next time. Oh, man. Emma. Oh, it's delicious. Come on.